36 seconds into the live hearing, Nancy Mace dropped the word welfare queen like a grenade aimed straight at Jasmine Crockett, live before 2 million Americans. But numbers don't lie. 82% of welfare recipients in her own state are white. Jasmine didn't flinch. She reached for something far deadlier than outrage. What she pulled out next didn't just silence the room, it detonated a truth no one was ready for. Are you? The hearing room didn't feel like Congress. It felt like a courtroom built for television overhead lights, hot as interrogation lamps, microphones too close, chairs too stiff. Reporters leaned forward like wolves waiting for the first drop of blood. Every screen in America was live. No scripts, no filters, just two women and a bomb waiting to go off. Nancy Mace stood like she was posing for a statue spine, stiff lips, tight eyes, already loaded. She wasn't here to legislate. She was here to land something, and she did right between the eyes. We're not here to fund any more welfare queens. The words sliced the air like a razor dipped in acid. Nobody laughed. Nobody even breathed. You could hear the scratch of a pen across the room. For a full beat, it was like the whole chamber forgot how to move. All eyes, every last camera phone and whisper swung to Jasmine Crockett. But she didn't flinch. She didn't lean forward. She didn't raise a brow or tighten her jaw. She just sat there quiet as a match before the strike. And then she moved, not loud, not fast, just deliberate. Her pen touched paper. 3 words. Thick black ink. Let's talk numbers. That was it. No speech. No outrage. No headlines yet, just the kind of stillness that feels like a wire pulled tight. Mace smirked like she'd drawn blood. But Jasmine didn't even blink. And in that moment, the most dangerous woman in the room wasn't the one with the microphone. It was the one holding her fire. When you're the target of a public hit, but you don't duck, don't shout, and don't run, what are you really planning? The cameras didn't blink. The air still hadn't recovered. Nancy Mace leaned back like she delivered the final blow. But Jasmine, she stayed still, too still. One aide behind her leaned in, barely a whisper. She wants you to blow up. Jasmine didn't turn. She just tapped her pen once against the paper as if marking time. Then she gave the smallest shake of her head. No, not today. She'd seen this play before. The slur just had a new suit, a better mic, and better lighting. Decades-old poison now served on CS-Pan with a smile. Welfare queen, 2 words that carried 50 years of coded hate disguised as budget policy. Jasmine wasn't shocked. She was surgical now. Behind her, phones buzzed. Twitter exploded like popcorn oil, clip after clip, frame by frame. Did she just say that on national TV Jasmine's gonna clap back? This is about to go viral. But Jasmine didn't move. She let the chaos swirl while she stayed perfectly still, centered like the eye of a storm built on other people's fear. Mace glanced across the table, expecting fire. What she got instead was silence so cold it burned. Jasmine didn't give her what she wanted. No outburst, no anger, no headline-ready fury. Just a calm so sharp it drew blood without raising a hand. The trap was set, and it wasn't Jasmine who walked into it. Because when you wait long enough, a lie starts unraveling on its own. And Jasmine Crockett knew exactly when to cut the thread. What kind of truth takes its time and still strikes harder than any scream? It started with a glance. A young black mother in the front row clutching her son just a little tighter. She didn't speak. She didn't blink, but her eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett said everything. Not fear, recognition. Like she knew exactly what had just been unleashed and who it was meant for. 2 rows behind her, a man in a veteran's cap, creased face. Stiff hands gripped the armrest like he was back in the fight. Not the one overseas. The one here. The one that doesn't end when the war is over, but only changes shape into skipped medications, overdue utility bills, and silence so loud it chokes. He stared not at Mace but at Jasmine, as if silently asking, "Will you say what we've never been allowed to?" Something shifted. Not in the script, but in the room itself. The gallery leaned in. Even the interns stopped pretending to type. This wasn't just a budget hearing anymore. This was something heavier, older, hotter, like someone had cracked the floor open and history started rising through the marble. Jasmine hadn't said a word, But somehow the silence had already done more damage than 1,000 speeches. It wasn't passive, it was electric. The kind of silence that makes people sweat, makes power twitch, makes a lie feel exposed before it's even named. And for the first time, Nancy Mace's smirk faltered, just for a breath. But it was enough. She realized the trap she thought she set was never hers to begin with. What happens when the target refuses to play the role she was assigned and rewrites the script instead? The silence cracked when Jasmine finally leaned toward the mic. No fire, no shake in her voice, just a calm that sounded more like a scalpel than a soundbite. "Do you even know who you're talking about?" she asked, not looking at Mace, but straight through her. The room tightened. Even the marble seemed to lean closer. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the truth. A single sheet of paper in her hand, black text, no drama, no design. Just numbers. According to the South Carolina Department of Social Services, she said 82% of welfare recipients in your state are white. One sentence, one statistic, and it hit like a gavel made of iron. Gasps didn't come. Not yet. Just the sharp sound of reality landing on stone. Jasmine didn't pause to revel in it. She continued. "So when you say welfare queen, let's be clear, you're not talking about facts. You're talking about fear, manufactured, marketed, and aimed. Every word clean as a knife sliding across glass." Across the room, Mace sat straighter, but the color drained slightly from her face. She wasn't expecting data. She was expecting outrage, something she could control. But this was evidence, delivered like a verdict, because Jasmine wasn't here to defend herself. She was here to prosecute the lie. And in that moment, the chamber began to understand this wasn't rebuttal, it was indictment. What if the numbers don't just contradict the story, they reveal who it was designed to erase Jasmine? Let the numbers settle like ash over the room, quiet, undeniable, suffocating. Then without warning, she reached into a folder and unfolded a letter with creases so deep it looked like it had been read 100 times under a kitchen light bulb. "This," she said softly, "is from Amber. She lives in Goose Creek, South Carolina. Voted for you twice, Congresswoman Mace." The chamber held its breath again. This time it wasn't data coming, it was a voice no one expected. She began to read. "Dear Representative Crockett, I've never written to a member of Congress before. I work at Dollar General off Highway 52. My son has asthma. My ex hasn't sent support in 2 years. I didn't want to ask for help, but SNAP kept him fed. When I saw what Mace said on TV, I froze. I thought she spoke for people like me. I was wrong." The words didn't explode. They bruised, slowly, deeply, like truth crawling under the skin. Jasmine stopped reading, held the paper like something sacred, and looked up not at Mace but at the people behind her, the ones watching on screens in silence. "You didn't insult me," she said, her voice low but sharp. "You insulted her." Nancy Mace shifted, her jaw tightening, but she said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Amber wasn't a politician. She wasn't an activist. She was the voter they forgot once her ballot was cast, and the woman Jasmine just brought into the room. When the people you claim to protect find their voice without you, what's left of your power? The paper in Jasmine's hand lowered, but its weight still lingered in the air like smoke after gunpowder. Amber's words didn't just land, they echoed. Across the gallery, heads turned not toward Jasmine, but toward Nancy Mace. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was reacting. A flicker at the corner of her mouth, a twitch of her fingers. And then, subtle but unmistakable, her hand began to tremble. The camera caught it. Tight zoom. No mercy. No way to spin it. The poise, the polish, the political theater it cracked right there under the lights. Her smirk didn't land this time. It wilted, because the moment had shifted. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice once, but she had managed to peel away Mace's mask with nothing more than facts, and the words of a woman Mace had never intended to see again. Jasmine watched her, calm, patient, like someone who knew the avalanche had already begun, and all she had to do now was step back and let gravity do the rest. She didn't blink. She didn't lean forward. She just let the silence between them thicken like setting concrete, the kind that traps someone exactly where they stand. And still no yelling, no insults, just the soft, relentless thud of truth being dropped one word at a time. Mace shifted again, crossed her legs, glanced at her aide, but the room had already stopped seeing her as the speaker. Now she was the subject. What if the lie wasn't just cruel but statistically impossible to defend, and finally had nowhere left to hide? The room had already tilted truth, pressing down on every polished surface when a voice rose from the shadows. Not a mic'd official, not a journalist, just a man, gravel-throated, weathered. He stood slowly from the gallery, his joints stiff, but his voice clear enough to slice the silence in half. "You talking about me too?" Heads turned, security stiffened. Even the chair hesitated, unsure whether to gavel or listen. But Jasmine didn't move. Her eyes locked onto him, steady open. "Name's Leon McCrae," the man said, lifting his chin. "2 tours in Vietnam. Bronze Star. I fought for this country when I still had knees that worked." He paused, breathing heavy like each word had to climb through pain. "Last week," he continued, "I pawned my Navy ring just to buy my insulin." That sentence didn't land like a statement. It struck like a confession no one was ready for. Mace froze. The press froze. Even the lights seemed to hum louder. "I get a little snap," he added, voice cracking but unashamed. "Not because I'm lazy, because after all I gave this country gave me a fridge full of nothing." You could feel the entire hearing shift. From politics to something heavier. From headlines to a wound finally shown in daylight. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The story had moved beyond her now. The lie had walked into a buzzsaw wearing a flag, and the first cut wasn't hers, it was his. When a forgotten soldier stands up without permission, who dares to sit him back down? Jasmine didn't rush. She reached into the folder like someone retrieving evidence from a crime scene, precise, careful, deliberate. Without a word, she held up a photo. The screens behind her flickered, then filled with the image. A refrigerator, old rust-stained, half-lit from the inside. On the middle shelf, a slice of white bread, a crumpled ketchup packet, and beside them, folded with painful care, a tri-cornered American flag. The room didn't gasp. It recoiled. The kind of stillness that only shows up when shame is too heavy to hide. Jasmine turned back to the mic, voice low, sharpened by restraint. "This is Leon McCrae's fridge," she said. "This is what patriotism looks like when it's been abandoned." No one moved. Not the chair. Not the press. Not even Mace. The picture said what no testimony ever could service in one hand, survival in the other. Jasmine's eyes didn't blink as they met Mace's across the chamber. "You want to talk about dependency? He depended on this country to keep its promise. Instead, he got ketchup for dinner and a folded flag for dessert." The weight of it settled like concrete. No one dared to break the silence, not because they weren't outraged, but because they were. It was the kind of anger that didn't scream. It simmered. Guttural. Human. And it turned every camera lens from spectacle to witness. When a flag becomes decoration for an empty fridge, is the country still worth saluting, or does it owe an apology? First, Jasmine didn't blink. Her gaze stayed locked on Leon, not as a politician looking at a voter, but as a daughter of the same broken contract. She stepped closer to the mic, but her voice dropped lower, steadier, like a drum beat meant for remembering. "When a veteran stands and speaks truth in this chamber," she said, "only one of us listened." Her words didn't accuse. They testified. Leon bowed his head, not in shame, but in solemn acknowledgement. "You spoke for me," he said quietly, voice cracking like gravel under weight. It wasn't gratitude, it was relief, like someone had finally translated his silence into something the country could no longer ignore. Across the room, no one moved. Not Mace, not the press, not even the staffers scribbling half-hearted notes minutes earlier. The hearing had turned into something raw, something sacred. C-SPAN didn't cut away. They couldn't, because for the first time the story wasn't in the shouting, it was in the stillness after someone dares to say what others survive in silence. Jasmine let it breathe. She didn't push the moment. She let it stand tall on its own 2 worn-out legs, just like the man who made it happen. And in that moment, everyone knew Leon McCrae didn't derail the hearing. He redeemed it. Because when the lie was polished and televised, it took a man with nothing left to prove to shatter it in half. Can a broken soldier with a cracked voice and an empty fridge tear down the facade of an entire political machine? The moment Leon sat down, the room was still vibrating with truth. But Jasmine wasn't done. She turned back to the microphone with the kind of calm that made people nervous, the kind that only shows up when someone's about to drop something irreversible. Her fingers slid into the folder again, slower this time, deliberate, like she was unsheathing a blade in front of the world. When she pulled the page out, it wasn't handwritten. It wasn't emotional. It was printed, bolded, and damning. "This is an internal email," she said, holding it high enough for the screens to capture, "sent 4 days ago from Congresswoman Mace's campaign communications team." The subject line read like a warning disguised as a plan. "Messaging prep for federal aid hearing." She let the words hang in the air for half a breath before delivering the cut. "Line 3, she continued. "Use language that implies racism, but avoids direct slur." The room didn't erupt. It convulsed. Quiet gasps. One aide dropped a pen. Another looked down and never looked back up. Jasmine didn't blink. The document is dated, time-stamped, and signed. Her eyes met Mace's. "By you." For a second, even the hum of the air vents felt louder. Mace's face froze, not angry, not confused, just cold with calculation, suddenly undone. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The kind of silence that follows when the floor beneath you realizes it's been supporting a lie. Jasmine placed the email flat on the table. Not as evidence, as proof. What happens when the spin collapses and the signature at the bottom is yours? Before the echo of Jasmine's last sentence could fade, the screen behind her flickered. A Zoom window blinked open, unannounced, unexpected. The image was blurred, the voice modulated just enough to hide the identity, but not enough to dull the gravity. A figure sat alone in shadow, shoulders, hunched, eyes lowered. The chair leaned forward, confused. Jasmine didn't flinch. She knew exactly who this was. For the record, she said calmly, "Can you confirm that you were part of Congresswoman Mace's communications team during the lead-up to this hearing?" A pause, then the voice came hollow but human. "Yes, I helped to draft the strategy documents." "I was in the room." A tremor ran through the gallery, not panic, not surprise, but recognition. Something irreversible had just entered the record. Jasmine nodded once. "And the email I read earlier, referencing language designed to imply racism without using direct slurs, was that real?" Silence held for a breath too long. "Then yes. I saw it sent. I reviewed the line myself. It wasn't a mistake." The voice cracked just slightly before delivering the blow. "I told myself it was strategy, but it was hate." Across the aisle, Mace's expression fractured. The color drained from her face, her hand gripping the edge of the table like it might collapse under her. She tried to whisper to her aide, but her lips barely moved. Whatever control she thought she had left was gone. The screen stayed up. The witness didn't disappear. Because this wasn't rumor or speculation, it was confession. What does power do when its own people finally decide to speak? And don't ask for permission. Jasmine didn't rush. She stepped forward with the email still in her hand, holding it like a warrant served under bright, unforgiving lights. Her finger landed squarely on the signature line, projected now on every screen in the chamber. "You didn't say it, Congresswoman," she said, her voice steady as stone. "You authorized it." The words hit like a quiet explosion, no yelling, no drama, just truth dropped with surgical precision. Mace didn't speak. Couldn't. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted toward her aide, then toward the blinking Zoom screen, then back to Jasmine. But there was nowhere left to look that didn't indict her. Jasmine leaned in, her voice a match struck in a dark room. "Racism doesn't need a megaphone," she said. "It just needs a memo, with your name at the bottom." The room erupted, but not in noise, in tension. A reporter in the back dropped their phone. A Republican staffer went ghost pale. One of Mace's own interns pulled their badge off and laid it on the bench beside them. No one clapped. No one dared. Because this wasn't politics anymore. It was revelation. Outside, Twitter caught fire. Hashtags exploded. Screenshots of the signature circulated before the next sentence was even finished. But C-SPAN didn't cut away. They stayed locked in. Because the shot had been fired, and this time the bullet was paperwork. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't blink. She simply laid the document flat on the table and slid it forward like a final piece of evidence in a trial that didn't need a jury anymore. What happens when the truth doesn't shout, but signs its own receipt in front of the entire nation? Jasmine didn't speak right away. She clicked a remote and the screen behind her lit up, not with names or quotes, but with a map. Stark, clinical color-coded, like a battlefield. It showed poverty density by zip code, 5 years of state data stitched into a digital wound. And the color wasn't subtle, it bled red, dark red, blood red. This isn't the Bronx, she said coldly. This isn't Chicago. This, she paused, letting the image pulse behind her, is your backyard, Congresswoman Mace. The red zones covered Charleston County, stretched across Ridgeville, bled into Walterboro like wildfire under glass. Places that voted for Mace. Places she claimed to defend, now glowing like distress flares on live television. The room leaned in, hypnotized by data that didn't care who was watching. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice, the map screamed for her. You talk about dependency, she said, pointing to a cluster near Monk's Corner. But what this shows isn't laziness. It's abandonment. Schools shut down. Grocery stores disappeared. Clinics too far to reach without a car. Mace didn't look up. Couldn't. Because every dot, every crimson patch, every statistic carved into that screen wasn't abstract. It was local, personal, undeniable. And the worst part wasn't that her district was suffering. It was that she had weaponized that suffering, then blamed it on the wrong people. Jasmine clicked once more. A new layer appeared. Overlaid voting patterns. And the result was unmistakable. What if the people you claimed to fight for were the ones your policies quietly buried? The map still pulsed on the screen red. Relentless when Jasmine stepped back to the mic with something even heavier in her hand, a photo. No chart, no bar graph. Just a picture faded taken from a school nurse's report in Mace's own district. This, Jasmine said quietly, is Aiden's lunchbox. The screen changed again, and the image filled the chamber. Inside the lunchbox, one slice of plain white bread. One single ketchup packet. That's all. No fruit, no protein, no milk. A child's hunger reduced to a condiment. Aiden fainted during a spelling quiz. Jasmine continued, her voice tight but steady. The nurse thought it was a seizure. It wasn't. He just hadn't eaten in 24 hours. The silence hit like a punch to the chest. One reporter lowered her camera. A congressional aide looked away, suddenly interested in his shoes. Mace didn't move, but her hands clasped on the desk were clenched too tightly now, white at the knuckles. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You didn't cut waste, she said, turning slowly toward Mace. You cut food. The words were simple, but they carved like glass. You voted to slash federal lunch programs, then blamed the empty trays on parents. And this, she pointed to the photo again, is what that vote looks like in real life. No one in the room dared to speak, because they all knew this wasn't policy anymore. It was a child's body collapsing in a classroom. What happens when political cruelty stops being theoretical and starts showing up inside a second grader's backpack? Jasmine didn't let the silence linger. She reached beneath the podium and lifted a thin stapled packet worn at the edges but unmistakable. The Budget Reconciliation Act signed 6 months earlier, bearing Mace's proud signature in bold blue ink. She held it up like a mirror, angling it toward the cameras. This, she said, isn't just paperwork. It's policy turned weapon. She turned a page, revealing Section 118, reductions in supplemental nutrition grants. Section 204, school lunch waivers revoked. Jasmine's voice was low, deliberate, every syllable sharpened like a blade. You made starvation a strategy, she said, not accusing, but declaring. And then you wrapped it in a ribbon and called it reform. Mace shifted in her seat, not out of discomfort, out of exposure. The kind of stillness that only shows up when someone realizes the floor beneath them has been peeled back. Jasmine walked forward, laid the document flat on the table. This bill didn't just balance numbers. It took food off tables. It pulled medicine from cabinets. It yanked safety nets from the exact people who voted for you. On-screen, Aiden's lunchbox lingered in a smaller frame. Next to it, the red heat map of Mace's district. And now this signature, this proud, polished legislation, all converging into one undeniable image, policy made personal. The room didn't need a verdict. It already had a face. If food becomes a weapon, who do we aim it at? Next, Jasmine didn't reach for a chart this time. She reached into her bag and unfolded something delicate, creased yellowing, and tucked inside a worn leather Bible. Her mother's Bible. She held it up slowly like it weighed more than it should. This, she said, her voice caught halfway between breath and memory, is the letter that changed my life. The screen behind her lit up with the scanned image, a government-stamped denial for emergency assistance, dated 1997. The printed reason cut like a knife through static air. Insufficient evidence of hardship. Jasmine didn't move. She let those 5 words hang there, cruel and clinical. She was sleeping in a car, Jasmine whispered. With me, a baby in the back seat. And still, they said no. Her fingers trembled as she set the letter down, smoothing it with the kind of care you give something sacred. She kept it folded inside her Bible, she said, eyes distant, now voice thick. Not because it saved us, but because it reminded her no one would. There was no outrage in her tone, just the kind of pain that quiets a room more effectively than any scream. Mace looked away, but it was too late. The moment had landed. No graph, no email, just a mother, a Bible, and a denial letter older than half the staffers in the room. How do you prove your suffering to a system that already decided not to believe you? Jasmine didn't wipe the tears from her last line. She let them dry naturally like battle scars earned in full view. Her hands gripped the edge of the podium now, not for balance, but to brace the room for what came next. Her eyes found Mace across the chamber, and for the first time she didn't look like a congresswoman. She looked like every woman who had ever been dragged through the dirt for surviving. You called me a welfare queen, Jasmine said, voice cold as iron. Then crown me. The room didn't flinch, but it froze. Crown me in bounced checks and pink eviction slips, she continued. Crown me in nights without heat and mornings without breakfast. Her words didn't rise, they deepened. In stretch marks from jobs that didn't pay enough and bags under my mother's eyes because sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not a single person moved. One security guard at the back quietly removed his hat. 2 interns had their hands over their mouths. The power in her voice didn't come from fury, it came from survival. You think poverty is a costume, Jasmine said. I wore it. Every day. Mace tried to blink away the moment, but it stuck like ash in her throat. The cameras didn't pan away. They stayed on Jasmine. Because now the courtroom didn't see a witness. They saw a reckoning. What happens when the name they used to shame you becomes the title you rise with? Jasmine didn't sit. She didn't soften. She reached for the denial letter once more, the one that had slept beside a Bible and beneath her mother's pillow for years. This time she laid it beside another document, the budget resolution signed by Mace. One was printed in government jargon, the other soaked in silence and shame. Between them stretched decades of policy pain and defiance. She never got to see me take this seat. Jasmine said, her voice low but carrying like a storm about to break. But she raised me to reach it. The screen behind her split in two, one side showing her mother's worn photograph, the other a still of Jasmine being sworn into Congress. Some mothers raise children, she said, stepping back into the center. Others raise revolutions. No one clapped. That would have felt cheap. Instead, the room held its breath as if even the air needed to honor the woman who had endured hunger and heartbreak to raise a future congresswoman in the backseat of a Buick. Jasmine ran her fingers along the edge of the 2 papers, the denial and the law, and said barely above a whisper, You tried to erase her struggle. I turned it into legislation. The juxtaposition wasn't just emotional, it was tactical. It forced every viewer, every lawmaker to decide which paper they stood behind. When a mother is denied her dignity, does her daughter inherit the fight or finish it? The chamber was quiet, but the internet was not. Live-stream chat messages poured in like a waterfall, most scrolling too fast to read. But then one line appeared in bright yellow. It didn't blink. It didn't scroll away. It stopped the screen. Jasmine's eyes locked on it, and so did the world. I'm 11. My school cut lunch. I want to speak like you. No hashtags, no emojis. Just truth typed by fingers, barely old enough to spell it. The name attached Maya, Texas, a child, watching, listening, learning the language of resistance in real time. Jasmine felt her throat catch, but this time she didn't push the feeling down. She let it live. She let it rise. She leaned into the mic, not with power, but with reverence. Maya, she said, staring directly into the camera. You just raised me a beat. Her voice didn't tremble, but the weight in it could break granite. When I was your age, I didn't have the words. I just had hunger and fear and silence. She paused, swallowed, then smiled, not for the room, but for one 11-year-old girl with a cracked school tray and a spark in her chest. You already speak louder than most in this chamber, Jasmine said. And one day, you'll speak in this chamber. When the voiceless begin to speak, who dares to interrupt the future calling in? Jasmine didn't rush. She moved with the precision of someone placing names on a memorial. One by one, she laid the evidence before her, not for drama, but for history. First came the letter of denial, creased, faded, and still unforgiven. Then Aiden's lunchbox, a symbol of starvation, disguised as school policy. Next, the heat-stained poverty map, glowing red, like an untreated wound across Mace's district. She unfolded Amber's handwritten letter, its smudged ink bearing more truth than any press release ever could. Then Leon's refrigerator photo, the ketchup, the bread, and the folded flag still echoing in every mind that had witnessed it. Jasmine stood behind them like a sentinel, not defending herself, but defending everyone these items represented. Her fingers rested lightly on the table as if touching ghosts. These aren't props, she said, scanning the room. These are receipts. Her voice dropped to a whisper that still somehow filled the chamber. You don't get to call this politics when it's about who gets to eat, who gets to live without begging for it. She didn't point a finger. She didn't need to. The silence in the room was already a verdict. She looked down at the items again, not as a collection, but as a case, a story, a truth laid bare beneath fluorescent lights and hidden cameras. When evidence becomes personal, how long can the powerful pretend they didn't see it? The weight of the room had shifted, not in noise, but in gravity, like something sacred had just been placed on the floor, and no one dared step on it. Jasmine stood behind the desk, her hand hovering over the last page of her notes, though she no longer needed them. Her eyes scanned the chamber one final time, not to provoke, not to plead, but to remind. This wasn't just a hearing. It had become something deeper, a reckoning wrapped in the quiet fury of a woman who had nothing left to prove, only something left to protect. She looked straight into the camera, and her words came like a prayer, with a blade in its spine. If the richest country on earth can't feed its kids, then the hunger isn't in their stomachs. Her voice didn't break. It carved. It's in our soul. Gasps didn't follow, only stillness, the kind that settles when even shame runs out of excuses. And then she turned. No dramatic pause, no raised fist, just her back to the room and her face to the future. The cameras tracked her, but for once they didn't lead, they followed. Not a victor, a vessel, not applause. A responsibility carried in heels, clicking against marble, echoing louder than any gavel. Because the truth didn't need to stay in that room. What will you do with the truth that just walked off your screen? Sometimes change doesn't begin with a shout. It begins with an empty lunchbox, a rejected letter, or the eyes of an 11-year-old who knows what hunger feels like. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice. She simply laid the truth on the table and let us see ourselves in it. When the smallest things reveal the deepest cracks in our conscience, will you stay silent or speak from the heart? If this story moved you, don't scroll away. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where silence becomes strength and every voice counts. Tap the bell, because the next story might not just reveal the truth, it might reveal us. What part of this story stayed with you? Leave a comment. Let's not just watch. Let's remember together. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. The truth hasn't ended. It's only waiting for someone brave enough to carry it forward.